The content you're about to enjoy comes from the archives of The Best You. We're devoted to the very best in personal development, with a platform and resources dedicated to inspiring and changing people's lives. At The Best You, we work with the world's leading writers and trainers on the evolution of the self, and people whose journeys have been affected by their work and words. For more information, go to www.thebestyou.co. Jon Smith. This is a fascinating story of an amazing individual. Jon couldn't actually speak till the age of 17 when he was cured of a really horrendous speech impediment. And 40 odd years later, he has promoted some of the biggest athletes, some of the biggest sports individuals, NFC. He's worked with Diego Maradona. He has promoted the North American sports in the UK. He's brought the NBA, MLB, NFL, and the NHL. He has been at the forefront of sports and what we understand as a Premier League now. As I said, it's a phenomenal story. You're going to enjoy listening to Jon and how he's managed to build a fascinating career in sports and in the media. Thank you so much. Hi, and welcome to Inspiring People. Today we're here with Jon Smith, who's an entrepreneur and a TV presenter and many other things. Hi, Jon.
Good to be here.
Thank you. Tell me about your earliest memories, when you were younger. How was your life then?
Well, life was actually fairly good. I had two loving and caring parents. Had a younger brother, 7 years younger than me. And we've grown up together and we've run the businesses together. But I suffered, sadly, from a communications issue. I couldn't talk. I had the world's worst, I thought the world's worst stammer. And I became Jon Smith because my real name's Jonathan, but I never got the Athen bit out. People would say, "What's your name?" And I'd go, and eventually John would come out, and they'd be so relieved to hear something come out my mouth. They'd go, "Hi, John." So that was about as far as the conversation ever got. So my earliest memories were all blighted by the fact that although I believe we're all born with a talent, that God gives us all something, and my talent was that I was a very fast runner. So I became a bit of a school hero by winning races and stuff, which was my form of self-expression because I couldn't talk. So the teachers never asked me anything in school. I never put my hand up, and it's very easy to become reclusive if you don't communicate. So those were my problems, and bizarrely, after
I suppose at school kids were pretty mean to you, and
yeah, they were. And after a time, I guess you settle into life. It's what the pattern of your life is. But anybody who's got a disability, I think it fires them up. It just says to them, we've got to do better than him or her because we've got that much further to run. And life is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And for me, I just so wanted to be able to communicate normally. Mm. So yes, it was a struggle. But people have no eyes or don't hear or half a leg, and so in a way it's a similar disability but not as bad.
I suppose your parents try to help you with as many ways as possible. They took you to different kinds of therapists, and did they?
Yeah, we ran the gamut of what was available in the mid-late 60s, which wasn't a lot. There was a metronome that made you speak like that, which is not very tenable and didn't really work for me. Sadly, when I was about 15, my mum passed away, and Dad, in that same year, managed to find me a speech therapist, a bizarre speech therapist operating out of the Channel Islands in Jersey. And his name was Bill Kerr, and to this day he's imprinted in my soul. Bill's treatment, which would not be accepted these days, is that he maintained that stammerers have a fear of words, like some people have a fear of flying, so they don't fly very often, so I didn't talk very often. And in a world of communication, certainly these days, communication is the words of what we live by. In those days, it was a bit easier, I suppose. It wasn't all about how you look and how you sound. But Bill maintained that you couldn't make it in life unless you could communicate. So he was going to make you so afraid to stammer that your brain would accept that communication was its method rather than its fear. Mm-hmm. So we stood, there were 8 of us in this class, and it took us the first 3 hours to say good morning to each other. And we used to be made to stand bolt upright, purse your lips, nod your head to every syllable, and speak very slowly. And if we stammered, we'd get hit. I mean, physically punched or slapped round the face or punched in the back. So it was awful. But all of our brains seemed to say, after a day or two, this is actually something that we should do. We should speak properly because we're getting hurt. And I was cured, inverted commas, cured in 3 days.
3 days.
I was 15 at this time, so I had 15 years of 13 years of non-communication knocked out of me in 3 days. And I remember I had a particular penchant or non-penchant for P's, D's and T's. I couldn't say any of that. So we were released from the camp for an afternoon on the Wednesday of that week, and I went into St Helier with my dad, and I bought a polka-dotted tie. And that was a moment in my life when my life changed.
It must have been an amazing feeling to all of a sudden be able to talk like being reborn in a way, I suppose.
It was a freedom, actually. I was watching Hugo Taylor come out, I'm a celebrity, get me out of here in the jungle last night, and he said, it was life-changing. That moment for me was life-changing. We, all people around me, it changed their lives as well, because I was able to communicate. I was able to breathe oxygen. It was like a new toy. It was wonderful.
What happened to you then? How did your life change, or what was different?
I was imbued with this whole new spirit of adventure, and so I left school. I thought that would be good. I'm going to go to drama school, I thought.
Oh, yeah?
And I left, and I went
How old were you?
I was 16, and I left after my O-levels. I didn't do very well at school. I mean, the speech defect obviously hampered me, but I only got 5 O-levels. I think one of them I had to retake, so I wasn't particularly academic. But I had this new toy called speech, and I was going to use it. So I went to drama school, and I was rubbish at that. I really wasn't very good. But it endeared me to myself in the ability to communicate with people, and feeling comfortable in your skin and feeling popular with yourself is a really important part of life. It's the cornerstone of where you go, and so I felt positive about life. It was good. I had to speak to Bill Kerr every Sunday. I had to phone him and have this conversation with him. And if I stammered, he got really annoyed. But I fortunately didn't until about 9-10 months later. And I was having a bit of an off day. And he insulted me very badly over the telephone and said, "I'm coming to London." I didn't think anything of it. And about 3 days later, I got a phone call that I'm at the Regent Palace Hotel, come here now. And I went quivering to this hotel in Piccadilly and had an hour sort of reprise of the treatment and got beaten up again.
Yeah.
And actually, until the day he died, my speech never really went backwards from there. So a bit of a wobble when he died. And we became good friends over the years. And I can't, even now, if I'm presenting a television program or making a speech or doing anything that requires speech delivery, I sort of pop into the gents' loo for 30 seconds and just communicate with Bill, and I'm fine.
Amazing. So you went into drama school. It didn't work out.
Well, I wasn't very good.
No,
I mean, I think I'm quite good, and I'm 60 now, so I guess I'm quite good at being me.
Yeah,
but I'm not good at being you.
And what happened then?
Well, I left drama school, and I had this aspiration because I loved music. I had this aspiration to. And one of the reasons I love music is when I was a stammerer, and I still maintain that I am because it's always there in your head. I just control it. I could sing. So I was always quite fascinated by sport and music. Sport because I could run, and music because I could sing. And I got involved with a guy called Gary Lyons, who was an old school pal of mine, and we moved into a very, very poor flat together. It was a sort of a cottagey bungalow thing under the M1 flyover. It was terrible. It cost us £15 a month, inclusive of rates. So it shows you how poor it was.
Those days came back.
Yeah. And I thought it was a lovely little story. It was cold that winter, and we had these 2 bedrooms, and we had a little kitchen sort of at the end of this minor corridor, and we had no heating. And so we turned the oven on in October, and we left it on till April. And we got this huge gas bill in April, which wasn't possible in 1970 plonk. And so we complained, and the gas board came down, and they had a little look, and there was no gas leaks. And you wouldn't by chance have had the oven on a lot, would you? And we just said, we're 2 lads, we don't cook. No, I said, no, you're probably right. And we got an amended bill. So we couldn't do it the second year. So, yeah, we formed this little production company. We thought we'd be very clever, and we called it MEI as opposed to EMI. We thought people might get confused. And it had an office at the phone box at the local K garage. And we made records. And actually, we made football records. Because we thought there was a gap in the market, and we made records for Tottenham Hotspur and Queen's Park Rangers and Arsenal and whatever. And we started making money. And we were, I don't know, I was about 17 at the time.
Brilliant. Where did that entrepreneurship come from?
Well, I don't want to put all this down to speech impediment, because I think you are born with an innate desire to succeed.
Yeah.
Most of us are.
Yeah.
But I think having a disability, as I said, makes you that much more
Stronger.
Ambitious and that much more strong, yeah, I guess. So that's really, I think, where it came from. And my parents, my dad was always, you get out there and you make it happen, because no one's going to make it happen for you.
So you started making money with the records?
Yes.
And where did that take you? How old were you how long did that carry on for?
Well, Gary and I parted company because he had a part-time job as a recording engineer at Psalm Studios in wherever it was in London at the time. And one day, a band booked into the studio called Foreigner, and the producer was a guy called Roy Thomas Baker, and he was ill that day. So the band said, "Could you, Gary, the engineer, help us through this one?" And he got on so well with the band that he ended up producing Foreigner's first album. So Gary then disappeared and went to live in America and made a lot of money. And I was left holding this little production company with football songs in it. But fortunately, I had a few connections in the music world, and I ended up working in Northern Soul music, which was a bit of a cult following at the time. It was sort of older American R&B records, very fast-paced. And it used to be played at clubs like the Twisted Wheel in Manchester and Wigan Casino. And that was like a hotbed of all-night dance raves. It was the first of the kind of, I hate people to do that, it was first of the raves.
Yeah.
And it just got a lot of publicity. And we had things like Wigan's Chosen Few, Wigan's Ovation, Nosmo King, which was No Smoking, Nosmo King and the Javels, and a whole bunch of stuff that we were involved with. And we produced a lot of successful hit records. And I was very fortunate again to meet a lovely man called David Platts, who was a partner in Essex Music Publishing. And we signed some good publishing deals. At the time, music publishing ownership, the ownership of songs was forever, for life of copyright. So if you wrote a song and I owned the copyright of it with you, we'd have it forever. I think sometime during the 70s, Elton John challenged all that, and it became life of copyright, dropped to 50 years, and there were various versions of it. But at those days, we owned quite a lot of valuable copyrights, and I ended up being approached by an American company, back end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s, and I sold that. I sold that in 1981.
How old were you then?
I was 29.
29.
It was my life wasn't in straight lines. I was married by then. I was married to a wonderful lady called Lee, and we were together for 4 years. And sadly, she acquired leukemia, and she passed away on the week that I sold my business. So I was 29. In those days, I had a small 7-figure sum, which was a lot of money to have in those days. I had no desire particularly to be around.
I can imagine.
The fulcrum of my life had disappeared. So we bought a little place in Los Angeles, and I disappeared over there and spent about 2 or 3 years in the bottom of a whiskey bottle. Actually,
yeah,
it wasn't a very good time for me. But again, I have been very fortunate in life to have met some wonderful people, and they kept pulling me out of the bottle and sitting me on the deck chair and saying, this is the rest of your life. You have to join us now. And eventually I started again.
And what did you do then? How long were you in Los Angeles for?
Well, the one thing I loved about LA in those days, apart from the fact that everyone was just not thinking really about tomorrow, it was just a live for today culture, which was, although I wasn't minded of it.
And a little bit more sunshine than here.
It was a bit warmer. Yes, it definitely was a bit warmer. And I miss things like football, soccer. But I loved what they were doing in sport, which we weren't doing here in England. It was still, agents were still the dirty raincoat brigade in those days, I'll give you a few bob if you sign with me. And but I loved the fact that the things like the LA Raiders was a show. It was the anti-show, it was this dark pirate image, but actually it was a family show. And the way the sport event was presented was for the families. So it was, and the hot dogs got brought to your seat, and they were hot. Whereas at the time, if you stood at any of the football grounds, the only thing you got hot was the bloke peeing on the back of your leg behind. So it was a culture shock for me to see sport as entertainment. And one day, I was sitting in my little apartment in Beverly Glen, and I think it was the end of the Dan Rather 6 o'clock news. There was a story that Dustin Hoffman and Barbara Streisand's movie company called First Artist had been disbanded. It was the end piece of the story, and I thought, what's a great name? I like that. So I made some inquiries about the name First Artist, and I acquired it. And I was shuttling backwards and forwards to England anyway. And I linked up with an old pal of mine called Paul Mariner, who was then, I think he'd just joined Arsenal. He'd just come out of the England football team, because he was a bit older. And he'd left Ipswich, he was now at Arsenal. And I said to Paul, I've got this idea. With your connections in football and my idea of making sport entertainment, let's start a football agency. And it was one of the very first football agencies in English football. In 1985, we began First Artist.
Wow. And where did that take you?
Well, we were very lucky. Our first client, the week we started, or was the week or the second week we started, the England football team agent, the guy who looked after the commercial activities of the England football team, a lovely man called Harry Swales, who's still in the game these days, looking after Ryan Giggs still. He decided he wasn't going to be the England team agent anymore, and we and 3 or 4 other agencies pitched in. But of course, my partner was Paul Mariner, who'd just come out of the England team, so they were all his buddies. So I'd been in business about 15 days, and I'd landed the England football team as my first contract.
Brilliant.
And so that was lucky. And then through a few of my connections, people like Osvaldo, our dealers, who, again, were very kind to me over the years, we got involved with Diego Maradona. So I'd now been in the game for about 6 weeks, and I'd got the England team and Diego Maradona as rep clients. So it was a good beginning.
If you're interested in finding your true purpose, if you're interested in finding your legacy, if you're interested in growing, if you are sick and tired of reading books that don't help you, haven't helped you, or are not helping you, or attending courses and seminars that haven't really had an impact in your life, I invite you to read my book, The Question, Find Your True Purpose, out now. For more information, go to www.thequestion.co. If you're interested in working with me, contributing to the magazine, maybe speaking at any of our many events around the world, partnering or licensing The Best You, go to www.thebestyou.co.
Now, what I find fascinating, obviously, is you're talking about these different situations, and you keep referring to the fact that you were lucky to meet, but you obviously strategically had good friends and in good places, but you also knew how to play your cards, I suppose.
Luck is a good thing to have on the balance sheet, and you do make your own luck to a degree. There's a great line in a John Lennon song, life is what happens while you're making other plans.
No, I love that. Yeah.
And it's just, that sums it all up. You've got this idea, you've got a plan, and then something happens and you're not here anymore, you're here. And I've always found that you've got to be nimble on your feet, and you have to think 360 degrees. And that very often means interacting with people Now, I know there's a lot of people that say, okay, businesses are product, management, finances, and it's all that. But it's also, in most cases, it's an interaction with other people. So using the connections that you've got and the ability to embrace people, and that wonderful word that came back into my life after Bill Kerr, communicate with people, was so important. And I always found that to be, to use the expression again, a cornerstone of my existence. So we had these 2 clients. We had a few more as the weeks and months rolled on.
You did quite well for the first 6 weeks.
Yeah, no, it was terrific. I mean, it really was lucky. But then it was how we made that luck work. And so we, at the time, we're talking sort of mid-80s, and still the back pages of the sports pages in the national media were filled with people selling stories. And I thought, going back to my American adventure, I don't want to sell stories. I want to give stories to the media. I want to make the media my friends. Because if I've got the media as my friends, I reckon I've got a big platform to use advertorial space. Mm-hmm. So I went to people like Coca-Cola and Mars and larger companies and said, look, I think I can deliver you the England football team. And as an overarching sponsor, and I'm going to give all these stories to the media about the team as they get together for their 3 or 4 day get-togethers before any England fixture or during a World Cup or European campaign for weeks. We fill the national media. I'm going to give all this for free, and I'm going to dress the team in your sponsored attire. And it worked. All the stories were for free. We got very friendly with the photographers on the back pages of the national media. And so every time a Peter Shilton or a Brian Robson appeared, he'd be wearing a Coca-Cola shirt, which really aggravated the England FA sponsor, Umbro. And we used to have these mighty clashes with them and the FA saying, you can't do this, and this is not the way to go about it. So we used ambush tactics on the FA. And those were, so if people are watching this and got old VHSs or the ability to look back at the England team in the late 80s and early 90s, you will see bizarre things happening. Like Paul Gascoigne, for instance, may score a goal for England, and instead of going like that and standing and wait for the team to jump on him, he'll go like that and then look around him and notice the board that we've told him he's got to run to, and may run 80 yards up the pitch to stand in front of a Coke board and go like that again. And we also they used to warm up substitutes. And we used to say, well, when you come on the pitch, just stop and tie your boots up. And of course, when the substitution's taking place in any football game, the camera's on the player coming off and the camera's on the player going on. So the player trots off, our player goes on, stops about 5 yards onto the pitch and ties his bootlaces. The camera's on him and his boots. Mm. And nobody ever asked, why didn't he tie his bootlaces up before he came on the pitch? And so we had all these little techniques of getting our sponsors known, and Coke loved it, and Mars loved it, and they ended up sponsoring the Football League and things like that.
It was all groundbreaking, wasn't it?
It was groundbreaking stuff, and we made a lot of money, and we made the England team a lot of money, and the England team gave a lot of money to charity, which was never really reported as well as it should have been. Mm. So we were making a lot of friends in that time and making a lot of money.
You were involved in many different kinds of sporting events, not only football. Explain some of the people you've met and some of the events that you've...
Well, I love America. I love the freedom. I love the spirit of America. I love American sport. And I thought, as we ran into the 90s, there were we trying to, glamorize English football, which for me was always glamorous, but trying to make it a bit more pizzazzful. And of course, Sky came along. And I went to see people like Sam Chisholm, who were running the Sky product at the time. And I said, give me the product and I'll glamorize it. Look what I've done with the England team. And so I got very friendly with the Sky hierarchy, and they allowed me to do ridiculous things like, have dancing girls on the pitch and fireworks at football games and stuff like that. And people used to go, oh, no. But again, it worked. It led Sky into that sort of we are entertainment mode. And then I thought, what I'm going to do here, I'm going to try and bring over some of the American sports. So a wonderful man who was then on the board at Wembley called Jarvis Astaire, who I lovingly call my alma pater, because I learned so much from him. In fact, he had I call them Jarvisisms. He has these wonderful sayings in life, and one of them, which I always recall at my more negative moments in life, is no good deed shall go unpunished. You never understand in life why you do something good and it doesn't get rewarded, but that's life, and you have to still maintain your soul and get on with it. But Jarvis and I got together and we decided we were going to bring over American sport. So we brought over the NFL teams and we filled Wembley Stadium. And then we brought over the NHL, the National Hockey League, and we filled Wembley Arena. And then we brought over the NBA basketball and we filled London Arena. And it was just pizzazz for sport in England. I owned the London Monarchs for the first year, and we won the World Bowl, and we were getting 90,000 people for an alien sport. And my Royal Box at Wembley was full of the idols of the day. Duran Duran and the model of the day, and Danny Minogue was just beginning her career in those days. And they were all our guests because they loved the way that we had got British sport onto FM radio. And we were now entertainment. So there was a wonderful guy at Capital Radio called Richard Park, who I believe is one of the owners of Capital Radio in the group these days. And Richard and I conspired to put music and sport together because that was my little dream. And so we're now sport and we're on FM radio. So we were getting that funky audience into our sports games. And then we decided we'd bring Major League Baseball to Lord's, which was a real moment because, first of all, we had to explain to baseball what cricket was. And then we had to explain to the MCC that the hallowed turf could be used for anything other than cricket. So about a year and a half of these discussions went by, and eventually we got Major League Baseball to fly over and meet the MCC at Lord's. And they'd actually decided they'd have this meeting at the Long Room in the Lord's Pavilion, which is a members-only club and doesn't allow women in there. And, of course, Major League Baseball turned up with three people, and one was a woman. And she turned up and said, sorry, you can't come in. And they said, but we've just flown over from New York. Sorry, we have to have a committee meeting to ratify your appearance. And they couldn't find enough people to have a committee meeting. So there wasn't a committee meeting, so there was no meeting at Lord's. So we went to the Oval. And we took Major League Baseball to the Oval, and that day it rained, and it rained, and it rained. So we never really got Major League Baseball into Britain. One of my major failures in life, but it was a brave failure.
Terrible, amazing story. Anyway, out of these sports, the many sports people you've met over the years, tell me about a few and why you thought they were different or inspiring.
Shaquille O'Neal, actually, when we brought Major League Baseball over, Shaquille O'Neal was 7'1", with size 22 feet.
Taller than you and I, yeah.
Just taller than you and I put together.
Yeah.
And I was just gobsmacked by the physical ability of a giant to actually, obviously physically dominate because of his presence, but his ability to use his body in a way that, kids of 4'6" couldn't do. Mm. So the ability to have his mind educate his body to move like a little kid, I thought was stunning, and he worked at that. Mm. And so people like he. I also brought Mikhail Gorbachev over on his lecture tour in 1993, and my wife Janine and myself had a wonderful experience with it. He was lecturing through the UK one week, and Thursday night we had a night off. And I said to him and his then wife, Raisa Gorbachev, what would you like to do? He said, and in his broken English, he said, let's go. The four of us, we go for dinner. So we went to actually, I think, the Chinese restaurant, the Dorchester Hotel at the time in London. And, people say, was that Gorbachev that just walked past? Because he just finished being president, and he'd changed the world. He'd rewritten the map of the world. And he just, it was the time of the Jamie Bolger incident. He couldn't understand how that could happen. Mm. So we talked a bit about that, and then we asked him some questions. And it was fascinating to sit with history. Mm. He said to me, I started the peace process. which doesn't really exist these days, but it nearly happened. He said, I phoned Arafat. We couldn't, at the Soviet Union, we had financial constraints and we had to start letting the satellite nations run their own business, the Bulgarians, the East Germans at the time and so on. And he said, I hear in my bankrolling a Middle East conflict that doesn't have to be. So I called Arafat and I told him I wasn't going to fund him anymore. So he had to talk to the Israelis. So he did. Mm. And you hear that coming from the words of one person who had that power and that ability. Mm. And you think there must be, if there is a God, as I believe there is, there must be a moment when he sprinkles a bit of special, he, she, whatever God is, sprinkles a bit of special dust on people, because although they're not comparable in their global changing achievements, I recognize the same radiance in Diego Maradona as I recognized sitting with Mikhail Gorbachev. Okay, Mikhail Gorbachev changed the world politically. Maradona at the time changed the world from a footballing perspective, which touched a lot of people. But they both had that extraordinary, untouchable quality of knowing that their presence means something on this planet. Mm. Now, I believe everyone has that. I just don't believe very many people tap into it or have the ability to tap into it, maybe. But they all have it. And so my advice to anyone who's ever asked me, and I haven't achieved anything like that in my life, but anyone who says to me, what does it take to be successful? It's to explore what you really are and take that bit of your soul and actually promote it to people, because everybody's got a talent. Mm. I can't draw. I play the guitar badly. I'm not that great at maths. I'm not great at reading balance sheets even. But I've got that ability to run quickly. Still, even at 60, I can just about clock a 15-second 100 meters. And I've got the ability to put you with you and bring you together and make that happen. That's my only talent. It's abstract, but I've worked at it over the years, and everybody's got something.
Well, there's not a few talents you've got, obviously, John, over the years. It's proof now. With First Agents and all, the success of it, you eventually sold out. Was that?
Yeah, I mean, football was a cornerstone. I've used that word cornerstone. I've had a lot of cornerstones in my life. Football was one of my cornerstones, and I took it unashamedly into the entertainment world, and I stood up there and I waved its flag, and I
you probably transformed the way.
I think I was one of
definitely.
There were a few of us. I mean, what Alan Sugar did, what David Dean did, what Murdoch obviously beyond did. But there were a few of us that, took the sponsors, took the product, put it on television, made it sing and dance a bit, used the media to feed it. And so, yes, we helped shape football to be the global iconic entertainment that it is now.
Especially the Premier League.
And the Premier League is the icon of all iconics, yes.
Absolutely.
So I'm very proud of that, but it gave me a platform to do other things. And I love entertainment, so and I love live entertainment. So I looked at theatre. And I took First Artist Public in 2001. It was an ambition of mine to be a public chairman, chief executive, and I hated it. I absolutely hated it. I was there you can understand why chief executives leave after about 2 years, because the burnout, the intensity of regulation. And I actually can't recommend anyone go public unless you've got a market cap of in excess of 100 million, because it just doesn't work. The cost of the regulation and everything else.
And it's a completely different animal, a completely different business.
You don't have the flexibility. You're walking through the corporate world like this all the time. So, and I wasn't very good at doing that, I don't think. But, we did, the share price ran up, we did quite well, and then it came down again. And eventually we sold out. But in between, it was an adventure again, and an adventure with a straitjacket. So I took the business into theatre. We bought a company called De Winters, which is, I think, still the biggest marketing company in British theatre. And its then sister company called Spotco in New York. So we had London and New York. And I just love the fact that the more people get into IT, the more people live by the internet, when they eventually put their device down, they go out for live entertainment because it's breath, it's oxygen, it's a breath of fresh air for their soul. And so for me, football, athletics, whatever, theatre is all live entertainment. Even clubbing is live entertainment. People in any time have wanted that. Even in recession, they've now done that.
Absolutely.
So I think live is great, and we did quite well being in theatre because it survived this recession.
And you eventually sold out a few years ago?
I sold out about 18, 19 months ago now to a company called Pivot Entertainment in New York. And they took me on as a consultant, which is where I still am. And I took back the sports business with my brother. My brother Phil runs that now. And I'm sort of pondering what I should do next. I actually wanted to take a year out because I've been so intensely involved in my own corporate existence that my family, I think, didn't really know who I was. And I think it's important, whatever you do in life, to have something outside of your corporate existence. And so I said to my family, okay, I'm going to take you around the world and we're going to know and love each other again. Not that we didn't love each other before, but we're going to love each other in a real way now because, we can touch and feel as well. So we went to China, Indonesia, went to Israel, went to America. And after about 9 months, I'm beginning to think, this is great. I'm loving this. And I love being with my family, but I need to do something else. And I'm looking at 60 approaching and I'm thinking, no, this is not me done yet. So the family were sort of pleased when I said, okay, I'm going to do other things now. I'm involved in content distribution and various other bits and pieces at the moment in a ticketing business. And bizarrely in the kids' nursery business as well.
Kids' nursery business?
Yes.
I wanted to ask you, because we brushed through it, and I'm like yourself, I think we're both pretty passionate about, education and teaching and, communicating others and providing, people with a platform or content that can hopefully enrich their lives somehow. What's your thoughts regarding education and the current system and how it works and what it's like?
I get very disturbed when politicians get involved because education should not be a political football. I have my own views. I came out of a grammar school system. It worked for me educationally, even though I wasn't particularly academic. It gave me a good grounding. I've never used logarithms. I can't even spell algebra, but it gave me a good working knowledge of life and geography and history and bit of mathematics and English and grammar and punctuation, all the things that, are your life's tools. So I do kind of believe that kids should be allowed to find their own level. You shouldn't just lump them all together and say everyone's equal, because they're not. Some people are more equal educationally. Some people are more equal physically in their physicality. I just think education should be suited to the boy or girl and their life stream, and shouldn't be politicised and kicked about.
One of the things that we tend to discuss is the fact that if you look at technology and how it's advanced and how it's moving and at the speed it's moving, we feel that in many ways, we should be maybe teaching our kids in a completely different way. I mean, from my experience, we've interviewed possible candidates for work, and their communication skills are very poor, their social skills are very poor, and you're thinking, well, are we really preparing kids or people, young men and women coming out of universities? Are we giving them the necessary skills to go out there and have an opportunity? What do you think are the most important skill assets that?
Well, I think, Bernardo, you make a really good point, because I do despair a little bit of the education system at the moment. I think the world that we live in, the IT skills are essential, because what's going to happen is the world is going to pivot. I mean, for instance, I've been looking for a year to get involved in various businesses, and I've had a lot of them thrown at me. Pretty much without exception, they're internet-based. Mm-hmm. So the old skill sets of retailing, forget the sort of social groupings, so the things like cooking. So obviously although you can promote it over the internet, you have to go and physically cook. outside of, physical cleaning, cooking, drawing, whatever, IT skills are essential. So we should be teaching that. Mm-hmm. But I do believe in some cases you teach that at the moment at the expense of social skills. I mean, spelling in some cases is dreadful, especially on text at the moment. You're taught by your own peer group to go shorthand, and people forget how to spell because they forget what the word really spells like or looks like when it's spelled like that. So I think social skills are seriously important. The ability to understand and interact with each other, I think, is essential, and that's something that schooling in the coming years is going to be absolutely integral.
Yeah, and then part of what I'm sure you're very passionate about, which we've already discussed, is communication.
Yes.
Being able to communicate, being able to engage and be able to build rapport with people is key in any field.
And that is a dichotomy, isn't it? Because here on the one hand, we're saying everything is not computer-based, but electronically based. And it will be, and more so, that we're beginning to forget the social aspect of our life and the ability to communicate other than on a keyboard. So looking in someone's eyes and being able to tell them how you feel and what... I mean, emails are really impersonal things, and sometimes you get into a situation with somebody because you've sent a bland one-liner back, which has no emotion attached to it. And, I present a TV show on Sports Tonight Live on Sky, and we say you can tweet us, you can email us, you can Skype us, and that's all it says on the trailer boards. And actually, I throw in, and you can even actually, if you're that old-fashioned, you can phone us. Yeah. But still, that's so important. The physical communication with people is so important.
Absolutely.
If you're interested in watching the video content of this interview and many others, or interested in learning from world leaders and teachers, go to www.thebestyou.online.
Now, we discussed, we were talking about, what are the most important skill assets nowadays, and we're going on about communication, but I'm quite passionate as well about entrepreneurship. And I think what this country and what the world needs is more entrepreneurs. I think we really need to get behind, kids, people that are unemployed, and we need to give them a set of tools that they go out there and they can set up their own business, because nowadays it's easy if you know how. What are your tips and your ideas when it comes down to entrepreneurship? What's your advice?
Well, we go back to where you highlighted a short while back. Part of it is in the education process. So I think if you're in the education world, I think it's very important to provide a core background to life, which is, the 3 R's, and then advance forward. But then, and I think education does play this role, but I think it should continue to evolve into the new era of how you can manage and create business in the world of electronic. Let me rephrase that: in the new electronic era. That's where we are now. So I think as you come towards the twilight of your education, it's very important to understand basic business skills. Cash flows. Cash in the world going forward is absolute king. You cannot do any. I was reading Simon Jordan's book the other week, and he sold his pocket phone shop for 80 odd million, he and his partner, and they were running out of cash as they were selling it. And had they not have sold it, they may have run out of cash. And yet the management, the skill to manage all those shops and the stock and the sales and the marketing, the promotion, is an art form. And so many businesses fail because they see the dream, they see the product, they sell the product, and they forget what's behind them, which is the cash. And cash is king. In the coming years, the banks are going to be useless to you. They will not be supportive. They're all afraid of their own regulator now. They've got to keep cash on their balance sheet. So the quantitative easing that's gone into the system has gone onto their balance sheet. It ain't coming out anytime soon. So essential is remember that you have to pay the bills. I know it's an obvious situation, but everything costs. The regulations of life, the corporate life, are expensive. You have to contingent going forward. So my advice for anyone, be that free spirit. Create the idea. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to ask advice. Have a good financial advisor with you, someone who is cautious to your exuberance, so that you can always manage what's underneath your business, which is the cash.
As I say, a good leader is one that knows what he's not good at and actually gets the help. And
Look, I think I'm a good leader, but I'm like a big elephant when I create a lot of crap and people have to clean up behind me. But I used to wear this badge around because I make stuff happen. But that's my skill. That's what I do. I make things happen, and then people around me go, John, you can't do that. Or if you're going to do it that way. And we go, oh yeah, we can maybe do it that way. So yeah, you can't do everything. Although there are people, I have to say, there are people like Leonardo da Vinci in this world I never met, obviously, who seem to do everything. He was an engineer. He could paint. He had a brain that could knock spots even off of Jeremy Paxman, which you have to go somewhere to do. So there are people that do have everything, but in most cases, get a good team around you, because you can't do everything yourself.
Well, I think what you were saying about, and I can understand that maybe a lot of people think, well, I haven't got the cash. I just haven't got the cash to start a company. And part of the things that I've been reading and exploring and looking and learning is that, the world economy is moved 2/3 by private and, companies, entities, and it's only 1/3 that's moved by the actual governments. And nowadays there's companies like Kickstarter, there's all sorts of internet companies that raise money for a good idea. So if you've got a good idea, if you've got a web page, if you know how to market yourself, anything is possible. And that's kind of my approach and attitude as well. Because I believe I use yours as well. I'm a doer. I make things happen. Yeah.
Yes, I think you've got to be cautious when you set up your funding program. You can't rely on a bank. Somebody once said to me, the bank is like a company selling you umbrellas and taking it away when it rains. It's, sadly, that's where we are with them in this cycle. So I'm cautious on venture capitalists as well. I just think in the chosen field that you're in, there are normally people who skate the same ice as you, excuse the mixed metaphor. Take time and find someone who's a kindred spirit, who has access to funds, and be cautious. Get a financial advisor around you, your accountant, who can advise you best about how to run your own equity position. Don't be afraid to ask questions. There are good bodies like the one you just mentioned, who are around and available to help you. Don't be afraid to ask for advice.
Now, what would you say over the years? What your best assets are? Now, I know you're probably what are they?
I can run fast. As I said to you a few minutes ago, I wasn't born with any particular talent, and I think there's a lot of people like me on this planet who weren't born with a particular talent. But I think everyone's got something, and I think you have to discover what you're good at. I mean, mine is pretty abstract. It's about taking something and getting that person, because I think he would understand that, with that person who would possibly fund that, with this person who can manage it. And then I'll be the guy that gives everyone the corporate hug. I'll bring everybody together, and between us, we will manage it. Now, there are people who have all that in one body, and they do it themselves. And I take my hat off to them, because I'm not that person.
When these ideas come to you, is it a voice in the back of your head? Did you feel that it's right? Do you see it?
I think it's something you see on television, or you read it in the paper, or you think, oh, that's a good. I mean, for instance, we were involved with nurseries, and now I don't even like other people's kids normally. I mean, I love my own, obviously, but someone said to me they want to open a nursery, and would I fund it? And I wasn't interested, so I just popped it in my bottom drawer. And some months later, I was at a football club who said, can we fill Monday to Friday? Nothing happens here. Can we? We're outside of the main part of London, so all the big conferences go to the Emirates or Wembley, and we want to have activity in our stadium. Even a nursery, and I thought, got one of those. Now, I don't know nurseries from a bar of soap. So we found people who can run nurseries, and then we've discussed what Ofsted required, and then we decided whether it would work for football. And yeah, it does. It gives help in the community to their football supporters. And if you're a parent and you're a real fan of a particular football club, you'll at least give that a shot, or a thought process. It's obviously price determined. But yes, it works. And and it engenders goodwill to the very, very young supporters at the very beginning of their life cycle of that club. And the sponsors get involved because they like being involved with kids, and the whole thing works. I couldn't run a nursery to save my life, but I put in some money into it, and we brought in the expertise. So it's a question of grouping it around. Don't be afraid. Whatever the idea is, don't be afraid, because there's normally an avenue you can channel that. Just don't necessarily walk that path alone.
In general, and it's a generalisation here we're about to do, but what do you think the main, with the society and what society represents, what do you think is, what's going on?
Well, short question, long answer. I'll try and make it short. I think society inherently is good. Let's take an example. I don't think there's a lot of racism in this country. I think there's a lot of discussion about racism, and I think the last Labour government very disingenuously imported voters for the Labour Party, and you were a racist if you didn't like what they did, and I think that was wrong. I don't distinguish between black or white or male or female. I mean, there's a physicality difference between a male and female, but in terms of corporate opportunity, the female brain's nearly as bright as the male brain. Is completely not true. The female brain is as bright as the male brain. In fact, in many cases, it's brighter.
A lot brighter, yeah.
And more intuitive. But I feel myself being made a racist sometimes, or inverted commas racist, to use that expression again, because I'm told how to think all the time. I don't care what colour you are. I don't care if you're anything. I don't care where you come from. If you're here and you're black or white and you're doing a good job, that's all I care about. If you're Muslim and Jewish, which I happen to be, some of my best friends are Muslim. We laugh about the problems in the world between us. You know, the Muslims and the Jews grew up together in this wonderful land known as Palestine. And Palestine was physically in Jordan. And the Jordanians didn't like them because they were a tribe at the time, like the Israelites were a tribe. And the Jordanians massacred the Palestinians and chucked them out. And these Israelites were their brothers. And now it serves the Arab, some of the Arab mentality of control of the Arab street to say, we're not your problem, even though we're controlling you and not letting you do all these things that you should be able to do. There's your problem. It's over there. Look, the Palestinians don't have a state. And I think the politicians of this world have a lot to answer for. You know, inherently, we are good. Inherently, people want to get on with each other. That's not to say there aren't some very bad people on this planet, and there are. Inevitably, they get marginalised, and I think good will ultimately triumph. I just think we should just come to life with a perspective of equality. We are all equal, regardless of religion or creed or colour. And the essential fabric of society shouldn't be to create class and shouldn't be to try and create things that aren't there. I think let people to their own devices. Most people will not be racist, and most people will not be sexist, and most people will not have religious bias. They may have respect for their own religion and they may question other religions, but they'll have a regard that person's allowed to have their own religion as well.
Who inspires you now?
Well, actually, I've got the stage of life where I'm inspired by people who just enter my life. There's nobody. There's a deficiency of inspirational characters out there. I mean, from a sporting perspective, I loved Muhammad Ali because he was tough, he was strong, he was a character, and he inspired people. And he represented everything that for me was great about sport. You do it fair, you entertain people, and you move on. And I love Gorbachev. He changed the world for the better, in my opinion. I have a deficiency of respect for a number of the world's politicians today who've become professional politicians and stand there and pontificate about what we should and shouldn't be doing from a perspective of I've done nothing, by the way. I've just come through a state system and, you know, I've got myself voted in because I knew somebody and now I'm here and now. No, don't do that. Do what I tell you to do. Very little time for politicians. The inspirational people for me, bearing in mind I'm getting a bit older now, and people around me are getting sicker, and some are dying, sadly. And most of my compatriots are in good shape, by the way. So 60 is really the new 30, but, you know, hey.
Yeah.
But I get inspired by nurses and people like that who, I look at these people and I think, my God, you know, how you live this life. I see my friends come into your care, and I love you for what you do for them. And I think, oh my God, how can you do that? And thank God you were born. And then I go into my life and I leave that world. And occasionally, because you sit back and you think, oh, she or he is still doing that. And thank God for them.
I know you supported a lot of charities over the years. Tell me how you've been involved and the kind of things you've done. Doing.
Yeah, I like to give back a little bit, you know, and I've been very fortunate in my life. And so when Lee died, I set up a charity she died of leukemia. I set up a charity called the Lee Smith, then called the Lee Smith Research Foundation, now called the Lee Smith Foundation. And it was dedicated to research into leukemia. And we helped raise a lot of funds through some very well-known people who supported our fund. And we helped to find treatments for, ironically, one of the causes or one of the treatments that didn't work for Lee. So I'm quite proud of what that's achieved, and we've moved into other areas. I mean, meningitis research, and you know, now some of these things aren't as fearful as they were when we were growing up. God forbid a million times any of our children get leukemia. As a kid, it's treated. It's not so great if you get it in our age because our immune system's much more mature. But in children, if the doctor says your son or your daughter's got leukemia today, it's no longer a death sentence. So I'm very, very proud of that, and I'm really hoping that in my lifetime, and I'm 60, so you must be positive, assume I get to 90 in good shape.
Absolutely.
So in the next 30 years, I believe that there will be, inverted commas again, a cure for cancer. There'll be something else that replaces it because the world has to naturally clear itself out of people, I guess. But I really do believe that cures for cancer are within, if not touching distance, certainly over the horizon now.
So,
and over the near horizon. And the other thing is I'm passionate about, I'm the patron of the British Stammering Association, myself and Ed Balls and a couple of other people. And we have discovered through the research that the BSA has done that early day testing of speech, as the child starts to evolve speech, which is about 2, if there was a government early day testing program, there is a real chance, because the brain pattern, remember going back to the beginning of this interview, the brain pattern of speech is different when you stammer. You can correct it. And we could potentially, virtually eradicate stammering, which would save so much pain for so many people globally. Sadly, there doesn't seem to be the money around available to do that. There's early day testing for hearing and sight deficiency these days, but not yet for communication. So that's something I want to work on in the remaining 30, 40, 50 years of my life.
Brilliant. And just the final question now, Jon. What would you like your legacy to be?
Simply, I'd like to make a difference. You know, I'm not going to change the world. When I was 20, I was going to change the world. When I was 30, I had that in sight. When I was 40, someone had moved the horizon a little bit, so I was still working at it. By the time I got to 50, I was still going to change the world. Will I change the world at 60? No. Will I make a difference? I hope so.
Brilliant. Jon, thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you very much for watching Inspiring People. Thank you.
For more information, go to www.thebestyou.co.